Engages us this morning in our Old Testament reading from 2 Kings chapter 5. I was awakened one morning. The sound of shouting and screaming and yelling, and I, frightened, jumped to my feet, screaming, "Isha, Ish!" "Mom, Dad, where are you?" I ran out of the house into the middle of the street and was immediately snatched up before I could continue to scream, thrown onto the back of a horse, and then I began to struggle and to kick and to fight, and a man hit me, pressed me into the saddle as we continued to ride all over throughout the city of Salim. All I could see was death and destruction everywhere. It appeared I was the only survivor. Finally, it seemed to come to an end when he cast me to the ground and hopped off and stomped his foot right into my back, pressing me into the dirt. Squinting up, there stood a man, bigger than all of the rest, dressed differently, his clothes fine, his armor shining, a chiseled face, a mean look. He tossed out a bag of coins. They jingled as they flew through the air and hit the ground right in front of me. The soldier snatched them up. I heard him say, "Naaman, commander, general of all the Syrian army." Now I knew what had happened. I had been sold to Naaman. He kicked me up in his chariot. I was seized with fear. I couldn't speak. We rode off to the next town for the scene to play out all over again. As we were leaving Samaria, leaving all of Israel, we began to cross the Jordan River. Some scouts came back. Word of the Egyptian army just over the ridge. But too late. They were already on the ridge, coming down. Naaman quick took action. His energy, his valor was just unsurmountable. His keenness of the battle. We divided the lines in half, encircled them, and utterly destroyed all of the Egyptian armies. All of the Syrians that they had taken, captured, came to Naaman, kissing his feet, hanging on him. Naaman, the great warrior. Naaman, the great. Naaman. It was all about Naaman. No one could do wrong. Only Naaman. As we made our way back to Damascus, Ben-Hadad even himself came out, holding Naaman in high favor, greeted him, invited him in for the nightly dinner. These continued, for the season of war was over. He was taken to Naaman's house, given to his wife, the little handmaiden, the least of all in his home. A huge palace filled with gardens, hanging gardens, vineyards, a rich, lavish lifestyle. Soon the season of war continued and came around again. Naaman left for another campaign. He brought back much. His favor, his fame grew. People came out, hailing him of the thousands that he had slain, the 10,000s that had come and bowed to the feet of Naaman. Just his word of his coming, people trembled. No one could stand Naaman, the great commander. But this time the campaign was a little bit different. Something had happened. Naaman came in. The king immediately ordered all of his physicians, all of the doctors came in, the diviners, everybody looked. Naaman was declared a leper. Among the walking dead, the living dead, this is the disease that no one can escape from. Naaman, doomed for death. For all of his military might, for all of his energy, for all of his cunningness, they were useless in this battle. I couldn't imagine the feelings that he had, the anger, the rage that was going on inside him, powerless against a small little disease. The disease took control of Naaman. It overwhelmed him with pain. He would beg Baal for hours. just to get relief from the pain. He would groan in agony. Naaman's illness was consuming him. Soon, nobody wanted to come around. He was no longer invited to the king's table. None of his friends came near. They were all in fear that they would get leprosy too. But it was I, only I, that would come. I would listen to Naaman for hours about his plight, about how lucky he was to have had the life that he'd lived. And now he was troubled with thoughts that death was near. Naaman didn't fear death. Death was a common thing. What he feared was the process of getting there. Naaman was a man with death over one shoulder and no hope on the other. Life was bleak. My heart went out to Naaman. All I could tell him is that if he would come, go to Samaria, like I had told my mistress. Go to Samaria, have him go. The prophet there, Elisha, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman listened. He went at once to see Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad said, "Go now, I will write a letter to you for the king of Israel. Visit him." Naaman began to gather 6,000 talents of gold, 10 talents of silver, 10 changes of gold. Oh my, the vastness of Naaman's riches. He brought them all, carrying them on a great caravan. The entire army was with him and escorted him. What an entourage. It seemed that Naaman's old lifestyle had returned once again until the pain came. It overtook him, brought him to his knees, reminding him who was the real master. No longer Naaman, but leprosy. As we made our journey on to Samaria, I told Naaman of the prophet, how he could do this. I told Naaman of who the prophet served. He served Yahweh, the Messiah. The Messiah would come. He was a great king, a kind of King David, commander of all of Israel. Everyone would bow at his feet. He was the true king. Merciful, though. A king who understood the pain, actually experienced the pain of the people themselves, willing to die for them, even death on a tree. A cursed death, such as that. Naaman's eyes were big with wonder as I spoke to him about all that the Messiah would do, that he was even willing to suffer. And by his stripes, each and every one of us would be healed. I told Naaman, this is my hope. This is what keeps me going each and every day. It can be your hope too, I told him. Naaman just smiled, looked at his riches, and we proceeded to the king, who met him with great fear. It was Naaman, the commander, the general of the Syrian army, coming in. When they read the letter, the king of Israel tore his clothes, went into a rage. I noticed Naaman's hand was on his sword. In such instances, I suspected that he'd probably beheaded someone like this before. And just as Naaman was getting, I think, to pull that sword out, Gehazi comes in, messenger of Elisha, says, "Follow me. Come to the prophet's house." So we left. To the wilderness, we came upon a small little shack. Not much of anything to look at all. Not impressive at all. This is the place of the prophet? The great prophet that can give back life, rescue someone from the living dead, resurrect them, so to speak? Gehazi went in. Immediately, Naaman ordered all of the gold, the silver, all of the fine clothes to be put out. He stood there, proud as could be, waiting for the great prophet to come out, hoping that he would enchant an incantation to bring about such things, waving his hands wildly all over Naaman that the leprosy would be cured. Then Gehazi comes out, says, "Go wash 7 times in the Jordan River and you will be clean." Naaman stood there, He drew his sword. In a rage, he threw dirt into the air. Screaming and yelling, I thought for sure we would all be beheaded. Everything was cleaned up rather quickly. We left in a huff. He went on to say that wash in the Jordan of all rivers? Why, Urbana and Pharpar are much more. All the waters of Damascus are much cleaner, much better than this. What was he talking about? Finally, I said, my father, if he'd asked you to do something difficult, go and destroy a city, level a mountain, would you not have done it? He said, yes. I said, if he's asked you something simple to do, wash, be clean. Look, the Jordan is right there. So we stopped. He washed. But Naaman was different. He came up out of the water. His skin had this like glow to it, like a newborn child, glistening. And his heart was different. His face was different. His whole demeanor changed. Naaman was transfigured, somehow transformed. I don't know how. He came back. He spoke gentle. He spoke kind. He actually lifted me up, put me in his chariot, touched my hair. We rode back. He fell at his feet, begged the prophet to come out. And he did. He begged him to take all that he had, to take all of his servants, to come and take his palace, take all that he had, all of his vineyards, everything. Willing was Naaman, with his heart willing. He was willing to give it all up. For he was cured of his leprosy, clean once again. But the prophet refused, would take nothing. Naaman begged for forgiveness. He knew that Baal worship was no longer the worship of the one true God, the God of mercy, the God of great healing, the God of mighty wonders and acts. Naaman was following Yahweh, worshiping Yahweh. He knew one day he would have to return to worship with Ben-Hadad. But Naaman was different. He asked for 2 mule loads worth of dirt. Actually put his hands and scooped it up to load the mules himself. On our way back as we returned, it was amazing how Naaman reached out to the people, giving them his gold, silver, the fine clothes, all who were ill or infirmed. Naaman was different. It was no longer about Naaman. He was worshiping, wondering the true God. It changed him. Naaman no longer went on campaigns for the king. He was no longer the commander of the king's army. He didn't come into the king's court. He went to the lonely. He went to the poor. He went out. He listened. He cared. He gave of his own wealth freely with a heart of gold. Naaman was changed. Naaman learned. He learned that it's not about him anymore. It's all about Yahweh, about the Messiah, the one who can resurrect the dead. Because Naaman was resurrected from the living dead. Amen.